head-to-head, fiercely debating each idea and vision in front of millions of live viewers. Perhaps no other live TV program can captivate as much as the U.S. presidential debates before each election. And perhaps no other country has the courage to put on a show of such magnitude. The U.S. presidency not only impacts Americans, but also has a vast global influence. It may not be an exaggeration to say that whoever secures this position will become one of the most powerful individuals on the planet for the next 4 years. And to get to the White House, presidential candidates really need a strong performance in the debate against their opponent. So today, let's delve into the history of this event and its most significant highlights. Let's get started. The first time America held a presidential debate before an election was in 1858. This was a series of debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas during their U.S. Senate race in Illinois. These debates, known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates, became significant historical events, although they were not direct presidential debates, but debates between Senate candidates. The two debated for 3 hours without a moderator in front of live audiences outdoors. This event laid the groundwork for a fascinating tradition. Over a century later, the first televised debate aired in 1960. The candidates in that first broadcast were John Fitzgerald Kennedy from the Democratic Party and Richard Nixon from the Republican Party. Up to 66 million Americans tuned into the debate. At that time, not every household had a television. Those who listened on the radio felt that Vice President Richard Nixon clearly had the upper hand. However, those watching on TV saw the Republican candidate looking sickly, pale, and frequently wiping sweat, while the young senator from Massachusetts, Kennedy, appeared vibrant and dynamic. The importance of the presidential debates is, well, debatable. Many credit Kennedy's narrow victory in 1960 with an appealing performance in the televised debate. Then President Gerald Ford may have cost himself re-election when he fumbled a question about Soviet military strength in Eastern Europe in 1976. Ronald Reagan, formerly a professional actor, used strong debate performances against Democrats Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale to help secure 2 election victories. And an ill-advised decision to look at his watch in the 1992 debate became a memorable footnote in President George H.W. Bush's defeat that year against Bill Clinton. On the other hand, in an era of increasing partisan divides, it's unclear how many minds are left to be made up. Either way, the debates are likely to present the candidates with some of their best opportunities to reach millions of Americans. Around 73 million people watched the first debate between Trump and Biden in 2020, when it was broadcast on 16 channels. Many more probably watched online or encountered snippets. A record 84 million watched the first debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And now we come to the most prominent debates in the history of this show. John F. Kennedy versus Richard Nixon, 1960. The first debate between Kennedy and Nixon is considered one of the most significant because it entrenched the idea that appearances are an important part of presidential campaigns. The debate is considered the first nationally televised presidential debate in history. The best-known narrative about the debate is that Nixon, then vice president, ultimately lost the election because he looked old and tired during the debate, while Kennedy, then a senator from Massachusetts, wore makeup and appeared young and vibrant. People who watched the debate on television generally believed that Kennedy had won the debate, but those who listened to their speeches on the radio believed that Nixon had performed better, according to the oft-repeated analysis of the 1960 election. However, some historians argue this explanation doesn't hold up due to differing demographics between TV viewers and radio listeners. It likely was the case that the debate helped Kennedy look younger and more presidential, but we have very little empirical research to suggest that's why he won the election. Jimmy Carter versus Gerald Ford, 1976. After the Nixon-Kennedy election, a long period passed without any general election debates, until President Gerald Ford fell behind during the 1976 campaign and decided he needed to debate then Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter. Ford was relatively unknown to the public despite being the incumbent president, and not many people were familiar with Carter either. They needed the exposure from the debates to help voters really get to know them. The debates are best remembered for a single moment during the pair's second debate when Ford declared,
"There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration."
The moderator, Max Frankel of the New York Times, was unable to hold back his surprise.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence and occupying most of the countries there and making sure with their troops that it's a communist zone?
It's not clear whether the gaffe ultimately shifted the outcome of the election, which Carter won, but historians argue that the moment was particularly damaging for Ford because of the media reporting after the debate, which contributed to the narrative that he was clumsy and not up for the presidency. The idea here is candidates have to show that they can respond to the questions effectively. So who is able to be circumspect and has a good memory so voters can get an idea as far as what they actually would do under pressure? Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan, 1980. For most of the 1980 campaign cycle, Carter had been unwilling to debate Ronald Reagan, the former California governor, who was considered a master of visuals and humor. But Carter changed his mind about 10 days before the election, realizing that he was trailing in the polls and needed a last-minute pitch to undecided voters. While Carter peppered his rhetoric with facts and policy, Reagan countered with one-line catchphrases, including, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" and "There you go again." Reagan went on to win the election 1 week later, in part because he understood a fundamental of the debates. He came across as very confident and amiable in that debate, whereas Carter seemed to be under siege coming out of a hostage crisis, and he wasn't able to reassure the public. George H.W. Bush versus Bill Clinton versus Ross Perot, 1992. Unlike most other presidential debates, where candidates stand at lecterns and respond to moderator questions, the second debate in 1992 was conducted in a more relaxed town hall format suggested by Bill Clinton. The format was seen as benefiting Clinton, then governor of Arkansas, who voters thought seemed more likable than his opponents over the course of 3 debates. In one famous moment during the second debate, President Bush was caught on camera looking at his watch as a voter in Richmond asked a question about the national debt, giving viewers the sense he was being passive or bored. Every little gesture or word is subject to a lot of scrutiny, adding that it fed into the narrative that Bush was out of touch with the lives of voters. The debates also introduced the public to third-party candidate Ross Perot, who garnered 18.9% of the vote, one of the most successful third-party runs in American history. Exit polls suggested that Perot took votes from Clinton and Bush about equally, although some experts still disagree about Perot's effect on the race. Mary Madeline, Bush's former campaign director, later said that she was absolutely convinced that Perot cost Bush the election. He got us off message. Every event that we found ourselves in, particularly the debates with him, caused President Bush to underperform. George W. Bush versus Al Gore, 2000. In the tight 2000 election, Vice President Al Gore had been in high-profile debates before, whereas Texas Governor Bush was a relative newcomer known to stumble over his words. Going into the debates, Gore was in a better position, but he was seen as more aggressive, and people didn't find his style or demeanor that comfortable. During the first debate, microphones caught Gore loudly sighing in response to Bush's answers, and he was seen on the screen rolling his eyes and shaking his head in frustration at other points. At the third debate, Gore walked up to Bush as he was speaking, perhaps to intimidate him. Bush smirked and continued on, prompting the audience to laugh. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, 2024. Historians say that presidential debates matter the most when there's no clear frontrunner in the polls, and undecided voters still make up a large chunk of the electorate. Both of those conditions could be true this year. Polling data from 538 shows that Trump leads Biden by about 1 point nationally, and other polls show that roughly 10% of voters are still undecided. These kind debates are so important because this election will likely be decided by just a percent or two when comparing the current cycle to the Bush-Gore 2000 race that was so close that only several hundred votes in Florida determined the winner. If you go back and look at the polling that year, It's exactly the same case with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But that's not the only reason the Biden-Trump debates have the potential to be significant. The debates are set to feature the two oldest major party presidential candidates in history, and particular attention will be given to their age, stamina, and mental fitness. Trump, 78, has repeatedly called Biden, 81, too frail to handle a second term. Television is a visual medium, and people are going to be looking very closely at both of them. One of the biggest tests is their stamina. When you're in a debate for that long, you have to be at the top of your game. You have to be aware that the camera is on you. Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, 2016. Many have described the debate between Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton as a historic debate, a debate of the century. Observers predict that the performances of the two candidates in the debate will significantly influence voters' opinions, playing a crucial role in the outcome of the election on November 8, 2016. The record viewership of over 84 million people speaks volumes about the appeal of this showdown. In that 2016 debate, Trump was quite sharp. When host Holt asked him to explain his recent statement that Mrs. Clinton did not have the look of a president, Trump replied, "She doesn't have the look of a president, she's not even in stable health." And the 2016 verbal duel left the audience with a classic moment. Perhaps we will only need to watch without any further explanation. Clearly, presidential debates have now become a revered tradition in America. They not only allow voters to thoroughly understand the candidate's rhetorical skills, policy directions, or ability to withstand pressure, but also symbolize the direct free nature of American democracy. What do you think about this tradition? Let's discuss in the comments section.